Dr. McCormick here to my left did a presentation with CEC. I'm not sure how many other presentations you've done on the topic, but she's also scheduled to do a breakout session for the Mountain State Educational Service Cooperative, right?
Good job.
Another long name. They are here. I can do an advertisement, but I'm sorry, but Harrison County sold them out. They are here April 4th here at Stonewall for a one-day presentation on trauma. And I think that's something that ESC is developing as a professional development option for those who are interested, as well as I'm sure they have other topics that they are willing to provide you if you're interested in that. So many of you probably know Rikki. She is in Lincoln County and also on our board of directors. So I kind of talked her into doing this because I saw her at CEC and she really did a great job at CEC. I've actually hadn't seen you present before that, but I said, hey, you're great. How about doing one for Case? So she said, yeah, but I'm dragging a bunch of people with me to give herself a break. So I'll let you introduce the people that you brought with you, but as I said, here is our second half of our day of trauma-informed practices.
Good afternoon, everybody. During the morning break, Vic comes up to me and goes, you have to follow that. I went, thanks. I said, and lunch. Andy's good. So I'm sitting here trying to figure out how I'm going to make this a little bit different and how we can apply that. And he went, yep. It's like, okay. But then this morning, as I was getting ready and I was running through this presentation and what the overall goals were for CASE in developing this conference for you, I checked my time hop. So if you have time hop, you know that it can correspond with all of your social media and tell you what you did on this date so many years ago. And so when it opened up the Twitter part of my time hop, it told me that 2 years ago I was tweeting out in our West Virginia Ed Chat that there was a really positive thing that happened that day, that we had just finished 7 days for my entire district undergoing introductory trauma training. And I was like, well, that's pretty timely for that to have been 2 years ago, and then we're here today telling you about where we were and why we started and where we are now and where we want to go. Then when Troy was up here talking and he said, I need to tell you my story because you have to be able to relate to me as my story, I started thinking, you know, that's true. I do know a lot of your faces, and a lot of us know each other by our email signatures or what county we're from because we do have to correspond and collaborate and network. But most of us really don't know each other. We just know that person is the director of special ed in that county, this is the person is an assistant superintendent that is over special ed in that county, and this is what we do. So I kind of figured that for you all to understand then why this is so passionate for us and why it's so important for us, that part of my story will make more sense. So this girl on the left, her name is Bendy. She is 7 years old in that picture. She had been in foster care in 3 different counties, and it was originally done because that she was in a car with a man she didn't know, speeding down the interstate. Troopers pulled him over. Man was under the influence of drugs. Mom had put her in the car to get around a drug deal that she had gone to go do, and then the man was like, she just put her in here. I'm not having anything to do with her. I just don't know. So CPS gets involved and they take her. Mom works to try to get out of her addiction, but a lot of things that we know about addiction is that addiction is also a disease, and it does play within mental illness within her head, and her mom took her own life. So then she was placed in foster to adopt care and originally placed with kinship. So if you don't know about kinship, kinship means that they have some type of relationship with that child and they don't have to be a certified foster home to be able to go there. So she went into a kinship home. And then at her annual IEP meeting, the kinship mom looked at her and said, I don't think you understand. I just don't want you anymore and you won't be here with me next week. And so she was placed in another home. And that foster mom brings her into my office in Lincoln County, and that's where we meet Bendy. And I look, and Bendy's hearing aids are broken. She's playing with 7 other girls that are in this office kind of running around, but very bewildered, not sure everything that's going on. We make the request for records, and we start figuring out what her plan's going to be at her school. And when they leave that day, I look at Meredith, who is sitting right there, and I said, I want to take her home. And she goes, Rikki, you just can't take kids home. I said, but I want to. And she goes, that's not how this works. I was like, well, but how does it work? And she goes, well, and so we called KVC, which is the foster care agency that services most of our county. And I went through how to become a foster parent, and I brought Bindi home. And this is Bindi. This past fall, as a cheerleader for the St. Albans Little Dragons, she goes to school at Central Elementary in Kanawha County. She has a great deaf ed teacher and enjoys school and is thriving. Then, this past December, open up. So this past December, we adopted Bindi. So that's my oldest child, Allison, and Morgan, who also has a hearing loss, Michael and Bindi, and me at the courthouse. I know that she was placed in the system that we have in the state, and I know what trauma she experienced other places. I know what trauma I even inflicted on her on the days I didn't understand. When Troy said, you don't have to lay a hand on them, your voice already did when you don't understand that trigger, I dropped my phone as I was trying to tweet out a session for Case, because that was unbelievably true. There were days when we were trying to figure out how this works and how does she process her own trauma and how do we put our family together and how do I take care of 4 kids, and sometimes I really have no idea how to do that. And I would say something that seemed very innocent to me, and she would fall apart. Well, that also told me that trauma looks different every single day. So when we're going through our district and our journey and what we've done, I do not have a magic bullet for you. I do not have a prepackaged program that if you go buy this and train your staff, it's going to work. I can't tell you if you order these materials from this supplier that it's automatically going to make things better, because every kid is going to respond a little bit differently. And what I liked most about that video was we have to focus on the adults first. And that's what we did. We did focus on the adults first. We focused within the core group of our staff, which I'll talk about in a bit, and then expanded that out to our schools. And that's why it works for us, because the only behavior we can control is ourselves, so the only culture we can first control is our own. And so as we go through this today, I really wish that I could go, and if you do it exactly like this, it'll work, because there are some days it doesn't work even for us. But what we do know is that when we look back to 3 years ago when we started to now, we know what we're doing does work, and we do have the numbers to show that. That's supposed to load. Very good. So trauma-insensitive to trauma-informed, our district's journey. You hear a lot of trauma-sensitive and trauma-informed thrown out a lot. And one of the things that we do within our county is we try to use all the same language, and we're very clear about what that means. So for us, trauma-sensitive is knowledge. We have given you the knowledge to do better, but trauma-informed is when you actually do better. And that's the difference for us. I can tell you we are a complete trauma-sensitive district. I can tell you over 75% of all of our staff has gone through initial trauma training. Several of our staff have coaching sessions where we go in and we help them within the classroom. But trauma-informed, we're still getting there. We have some schools and some classrooms that knock it out of the park. We have some schools that we're still trying to get them on board. So it's not something that, okay, we're trauma-sensitive, check. Now we're trauma-informed, check. It's not how that works. And so we also know we have to keep being trauma-sensitive. Every time something more comes out with information, it's our job to get it out there in a way that they understand. What our staff is really good at doing now is asking questions. Why is it like this? Why can it not be like this? And if we know the answer, we tell them. And if not, we go, we're going to find out. And we try to make sure that we have that with them throughout that time. So then I start thinking about how long has this been around? Like, what are these trauma-sensitive practices, these trauma-informed practices? How long has this really been around? Because honestly, when we started about 3 years ago, we didn't hear that pop up. all we were hearing about within our county and other counties were, we've got some really extreme behaviors coming up and we don't know what to do. And then I started thinking about what trauma is and its effect on the brain. And this has actually been around for a whole long time. But it's never been to the extent where we all have to recognize it. This is not a special ed thing. This is a everybody thing. Before it was just a special ed thing, a kid here and a kid there and a kid here. It's not like that anymore. So I got really excited when I saw Pat Homburg walk in, because Pat gave me my first teaching job. She was my first boss. And she was also my teacher. So I get real excited when I see her come in. And when she gave me my first job, she also gave me an opportunity to become Wilson Reading Certified. Okay, so I'm a very young teacher thinking I can completely change the world. She gives me a great opportunity and I'm like, I'm going to fix everybody. Yay! Okay. So I get this child that transfers in. And his name is Chandler. And he comes to me. He's got an IEP. He's got an evaluation report. I can do this. I'm going to read. But then I start to read his evaluation report, and it says that he has an IQ of 50. And I go, And then I start reading a little bit more. And the background information is kind of holy. There's a lot of gaps in here. So I asked who enrolled him. And they said his new foster family. I said, okay, who are they? I mean, you're giving me this kid. Who are they? And they told me who they were, and I was like, you know what? They actually go to a church similar to mine. I might be able to stop by there one day. So I start going to that other church, and I meet his family, and then I introduce myself as their teacher. And they tell me about Chandler's story. Now, during this time, this kid comes and he sits and he does this. We don't talk. He didn't do any work. He's not a behavioral issue. He just sits. And so I find out Chandler's story. Chandler has an older brother named Christopher, and there was an evening at their house in which he lived with his biological parents, and when the police arrived, they immediately called CPS, and when CPS arrived, it was so horrendous that they immediately moved to termination of parental rights. And if any of you have ever worked within our kids that are in the court system, that rarely happens. So that should tell you just how bad it was when they walked in. So he gets placed in the foster care system, and he bounces. He lands in a really good home that love him and care for him, and he is having a great time. And then his adoptive mom, and they adopt them, and they adopt him and his brother, and then his adoptive mom is killed in a car accident. So, adoptive dad, his brother, and him, they're gonna make this work. Adoptive dad meets somebody new, she's really great, they get married, so now, all right, I've got my adoptive dad, I've got my adoptive, technically stepmom, still got my brother. Everything's good. And then dad dies from a heart attack. Okay, so adoptive stepmom, who has no legal rights to them, says, I will try to keep them. And she keeps them for about 3 months, and then goes to the state and says, I can't do this, and you all have to take them back. So they go back into foster care, and they bounce, and then they land with Chris and Christy Williams. That's when I get him. And I get that his evaluation that had just been done had an IQ score of 50. And I decided that and I'm not a psychologist by trade, but I decided that was probably not valid. I just don't think that's valid. I'm gonna make that decision on my own. And so I decided I was gonna be his friend first. I'm gonna be Chandler's friend first and see what I can do. And so I tried to learn what he liked and what did he want as a reward for doing part of his work. And I found out he wasn't as far behind as I thought he was. By the end of that year, when we dibbled him, he had gone from essentially not finishing a test to being on green in fluency and completely getting him out of self-contained special ed into a co-taught setting for 5th grade. And that was then Chandler in 5th grade. And he joined the Civil Air Patrol. He was active in his church youth group. You could see him in the hallway and he would grin and he would smile. But then he had to process all that trauma. And it started bubbling out. And we would be at school because I was still then his co-teacher in his 5th grade classroom. And he would shut down like he wasn't even in the same room as we are. he would go home and it was like a different kid would show up. He ended up having to be hospitalized for a 30-day stay. And in that time, they completely looked at the medicine that he was taking. He went through therapy to work through the trauma. When he came back, we had regressed a bunch, and we had to work back up. Because just because he then felt safe and he was succeeding didn't take away everything he had already been through. Kind of like when you get a splinter and you don't take it out. It's okay when it first grows over, it quits hurting for a little bit, but then it tries to push out, and you've got to do something about it. He had to do something about that trauma. So we did that. He continued on. So this is Chandler, as 21 years old. He has a full-time job as a mechanic. He graduated from PCTC in Putnam County, and he's currently doing all of his entry work to enter the Marines, because that's what he wanted to do when he entered 21. So I got Chandler when he was 9. Chandler's now 21. This idea of trauma has been here for several years, but we all have that story. We have that story about that kid. That one kid we have a story about, but it's no longer just one kid. It's the majority of the kids in our classrooms. The majority of the kids in our classrooms have trauma, because what we learned when we started this is that trauma is no respecter of persons. Trauma doesn't care about your SES. Trauma doesn't care about your race. Trauma doesn't care about your education level. Trauma doesn't care. It is no respecter of persons. So in Lincoln County, every story has a beginning. And this started back in 2015, 2016. I was a new special ed director. Kind of like when I was a new special ed teacher, I'm going to make everything awesome. I think I'm eventually going to get out of that Pollyanna way of thinking. And I come in, and I have got over 23% of kids identified with IEPs. I have a county that had been under state control previously. We are looking at different things, and we're going, okay, I've been in classrooms. I know teachers are teaching. But we have a really high population. I don't know what we're doing. I go in, I'm looking at the reports. I mean, the reports are good. I don't know what's going on. And so I also never knew when you became a special ed director, part of your job has to be a private investigator. I think it should come like with a credential. And so we've got to figure out what's going on. I have no idea what's going on, but we've got to figure it out. So we got a flyer by mistake. It was not supposed to come to my office. It was called the Drug Endangered Children's Conference, sponsored by the local FRN in Lewisburg. And it wasn't supposed to come to our office. It just kind of landed there. It was supposed to go to the preschool office. Well, we got it, and we thought it was really cool, so we made a copy, and then we sent the original to the preschool office. But we kept the flyer. And we decided that it was only $25, and if we all stayed in one hotel room, and it was on a Friday, so my preschool teacher didn't have kids anyway, all we'd really have to ask was like sort of a professional, and we'll even all drive together. Like, it's not going to be any money to the district. And my superintendent, who is a wonderful man that I sometimes thinks that when I walk out of the office, he goes, all right, y'all can go. So we go to this Drug Endangered Children's Conference in Lewisburg, and it's held in a church, which was still like, if I'm going to go an educational conference in a church. I'm not, okay, let's go, we're going to sit down. And we sit in the back. All right, we want to learn. And they had a guest speaker there. And the guest speaker first talked about her job, and her job was to travel across the United States. She was hired by families when families felt that their children had possibly been misidentified in the system. And what she had found, and what she was first talking about, was that there was an overdiagnosis of autism based on the GARS and CARS questionnaires without any further realization of what these children had gone through a history, because most of these kids had been either adopted or fostered. So the background information wasn't always there. And she was a trauma expert. And so what she found then, when she started working with these families, is that they could uncover through a little investigative work, but then trauma type therapy, that what these kids really were, in fact, they were traumatized. And that what she wanted, as she was being invited to travel around the United States, and mainly with groups sponsored like the FRNs, was that she wanted people to know this. So we're sitting there and we go, what if are kids that aren't responding to the therapies and strategies that we know work. Okay, we know what strategies work with kids with learning disabilities. We know what strategies work overall with kids with autism. We know these things. We have certifications in them. That's what we went to school for, but these kids aren't responding to that. What if their history has trauma in it? So I'm getting out my little to-do book, and I said, we need to check their files. We're going to go look through their files. And then she goes into the second part of her presentation. I'm already excited. I can go home with what I've learned at this point. But then she said, who has ever heard of ACEs? And I looked and I went like an ace, like on a card, like a playing card. You know, we're being whatever. And she goes, this is about adverse childhood experiences. And we're sitting there, no one's raising their hand, so we're not the only one. And she explains that there was a study done that they polled thousands of people and what experiences had they gone through as a child. And then they were looking at their health outcomes and their behavior outcomes. And what they found, like Troy explained to us this morning, was astronomical when you look at the percentage of they are more likely to have a heart attack, they are more likely to engage in high-risk behaviors, they are more likely to have cancer, they're more likely to do all of these things because of what had happened to them in childhood. So then, the presenter says, and now you guys are going to take that same study. Okay. So we get out our little piece of paper because we're really not exactly sure what this means. And so she starts reading off the 10 questions of the ACE study. And almost immediately, myself and my two colleagues that were sitting there, we get very, very defensive. Because who here has taken the ACE study? So about a fifth of the room. Okay. So within the story of what we learned about the impact of ACEs, I'm going to tell you all these questions. I would encourage you to take your own ACE score. No one's going to ask you what it is, but it's something that if you understand, it may help you as you go back to your districts with what you need to do to become trauma sensitive and trauma informed. So the first question is that did a parent or another adult in the household, which also means an adult that was often in the household, didn't necessarily have to live with you, swear at you, insult you, put you down, humiliate you, make you think that you could be physically hurt in their threatening once or several times? In that first question, when it said once or several times, I wanted to say that that's one and a lot are not the same thing. They can't be the same thing. This cannot, no, because we had already been told about what these numbers can mean, and I said, once and several times cannot be the same thing. But, so I make my column of once and several times, because I'm not going to have anything in the several times column. But, I'll be honest with this, and I've got my little piece of paper. Then the second question was, did a parent or another adult in the household, once or several times, push, grab, slap, throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that it left a mark, even once? So then the third question comes up. Did an adult or a person at least 5 years older than you, even if they did not live in the household, ever touch, fondle, or have touched your body in a sexual way? Did they try or actually succeed to have oral, anal, or vaginal sex with you? And at that point, I dropped my pen and I said, this question cannot be an all or nothing question. This is not right. This question can't be an all or nothing question. It can't be that way. Lady keeps on reading the questions, okay? No one cares about my little defensive fit that I'm having in the back row of this church. And she goes, did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought that you were important or special? Or maybe your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? She keeps reading. Did you often feel that you didn't have enough to eat? You had to wear dirty clothes, had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or too high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? At this point, me and my nice little white, middle class, college-educated self said, maybe I'm not going to get as angry over the rest of these. Then she kept reading. And it said, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Did your mother ever have anything thrown at her? Was she ever kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over for a few minutes or threatened with a gun with a knife? Still, I'm feeling okay. And then it said, do you live anyone with a problem drinker or an alcoholic or use street drugs? Did you ever have a household member that was depressed, suffer from a mental illness, or attempt suicide? Or did a house member go to prison? And by the time we got to the number 10, I'm sitting there and I look to my left and I look to my right, and they are as shell-shocked as I am. And I kind of said, I'll show you mine if I show you yours. And we realized that all of our ACE scores were the same. And we sat there for a very long time, because how we processed things and how we worked with each other and worked with our kids now made a lot of sense. Our backgrounds didn't match at all. Our backgrounds were not similar in the least, but our ACE scores were. And at that point, understanding what ACEs did to affect kids physiologically and then in the classroom, and what could happen to them if they didn't learn resiliency and grit as they got older, I realized ACEs don't care about how much money your parents make, or their education level, or their race. You could have the best close-knit family, that nuclear family that they go to church every Sunday and Wednesday. They never do anything, like they don't cuss, they don't drink, they don't do drugs, they don't do any of that. But you could still have ACEs due to other family members or adults in the home. And so we couldn't approach this problem as going, it's going to be these kids that are affected, but these kids will be okay. Because we then understood that we can't look at a kid and know. We're not going to know from the outside what they've been through, what they've been subjected through, or then how they have dealt with that. So we came back with a lot of knowledge, a couple of plans, and a realization of this isn't anything new, but it's something that we're going to have to deal with. So we got back, and we want you to think about an octopus. There were several things we wanted to do, and we weren't exactly sure how to start, but we decided we were going to go in multiple directions and try to figure this out. The first thing we did was those kids that we thought, hey, those kids where all those strategies aren't working, I wonder about what's in their files. We went back in their files. And when we went to the very beginning, we could find evidences of ACEs. And most of our kids would hit 4 or more, and we go, that's what we're dealing with. The reason they're not responding to these strategies is because we're treating the wrong thing. And then when I tried to explain that the first time to a group of my colleagues, I said, does Tylenol work? And they look at me and I'm like, does Tylenol work as a drug? We sell it as a drug, right? It works? And they go, yeah. I said, but if you have a broken arm and you have cancer and you have TB, is Tylenol going to help you? I mean, it might help the pain of your broken arm a little bit, but is it going to heal it? No, but it works for this headache. It works for this strained muscle over here. It works, but it doesn't work here. I said, that's what we're doing with these kids. We're giving them strategies that work, but it's not working for what they have going on while we're seeing those behaviors, while we're seeing that performance in the classroom. So we knew we wanted to get information out. So one of the first things that we did, and I have to give credit to Dr. Connor Atkins, who is now a psychology professor at Marshall. She was our lead psychologist in Lincoln County. She revised all of our SAT plans. She kind of went back through it. She cut what we had been doing. She went back and really delineated everything that needed to be on the prior history and broke down the intervention plans so that we could go in and train people how to use SAT to support these kids. They don't need to be a direct referral for special education, or at least not yet, but we've got to have a paper trail. We've got to know what we're doing, and we have to know why we're doing what we're doing. So she did a fantastic job revising those SAT plans. So that's the first thing we did. We went in and we trained and we started using those new SAT plans. We also then tried to start thinking creatively about how we used personnel. We've got a video that we're going to show you, and there's going to be a lady, and she's got dark hair, about to hair, and glasses. Her name's Teresa Feller. And the reason I'm telling you that is because she's a speech therapist. And she came to us in the beginning, and she was like, I believe what we're doing. Tell me how I can do this, but I got a whole bunch of kids. So how do I do this? So we worked with our speech therapists, and we added something called speech steps using then SPL, which is now MTSS, which was previously RTI. But we decided to call it speech steps because we know for certain those letters are going to change again. But speech steps we can keep. So that we went through all of our kids, and if they had mild to moderate RTIC that we think basically interaction and some correction that we could do in the classroom would help, we put them in speech steps. And we then separated our classrooms. We made sure that we could work within those numbers. And so we completely cut down a lot of our speech numbers. We then had our speech therapists focus a lot on language. And then Teresa Feller specifically, she does a lot of trauma-informed care in the school, and she's actually the point person. So she'll come in, and she uses that within her, not only her language therapy with her kids, but then she expands on that, because most of her kids that she has in language therapy are the kids that she's called out to help when they have behavioral issues in the classroom. And so we started using then creative ways to use our personnel. I have to give credit on this next one, OneNote Notebook of Trauma Resources, to Meredith. She's the, the one right in her hand. Because as we were working on this, she said, well, we need to make like a resource notebook that has to be applicable. And I said, we can't make like 3-ring notebooks for this stuff. It's coming out too quickly. It's going to be way too much paper. What if it's not, then something finds that something else doesn't work and we want to take it away, and how do we make sure that everybody has access to it? And so then she was taking then all our resources and she put it in a OneNote notebook that then all of our staff across Lincoln County has access to. So then when we get new information, new strategies, new research, she puts it in the trauma notebook, and then everybody immediately has access to it. Because trauma-sensitive is the knowledge, trauma-informed is the action, but we can't act before we know. Youth mental health first aid, we did bring that in and trained a large number of staff, because there is a barrier almost that they go, I didn't go to school to know how to do this, and I'm afraid I'm going to hurt a kid more than I'm going to help him. So all of our staff that felt that way, we invited them to youth mental health first aid. If you feel like working with a kid in this way, expanding on what they're going through in this way, you don't feel comfortable, we're going to train you. And we're going to use a certification training so that you feel secure in what you're doing. That's also where Journey of Hope and Save the Children came in. So not just that first intervention, that first aid to get them where they need to go, but also if we need to have therapy groups, what does that look like? So we have the opportunity to bring in the organization Save the Children to train trainers across our county to do Journey of Hope groups. And so those groups that focus on trauma and grief it's very scripted, but it allows them to work with these kids in a very structured manner. Again, where they feel secure in what they're doing. Our school that has taken off with the Journey of Hope Save the Children is our school that has completely embraced how this also fits within MTSS. So when they work on their schedule, they work really hard that they have a walk to intervention schedule, and they do 2 days of reading, 2 days of math, 1 day of behavior. And on that 1 day of behavior, some of that is those Journey of Hope groups. So kids that are involved in the Journey of Hope groups do that on their day of intervention for behavior. We also utilize CPI. Now, and we heard a lot this morning about not putting your hands on a kid. And CPI, the biggest part of it is not putting your hands on a kid. It's about de-escalation. So we have central office trainers, but we also have a trainer at each school. And they are told that when you go train, we're training de-escalation. We're training the classroom management. We're training this behavioral piece. That's the biggest part. That's what we want you to do. And then those school trainers have our central office trainers as a resource, because our central office trainers are also advanced physical hold certified. So they can go in and train our staff on advanced physical holds. Handle with Care conference. So the first year that we go to the Handle with Care conference, we basically just go, who wants to go? At this point, it's very much a special ed thing. It's this trauma initiative. Everybody's really leery of this. And so we're like, who wants to go with us? Like, it's a party. Come on, let's go. So we took a representative from each school. Some of those representatives from that school completely stayed with us. Some of them said, I don't think I can do this. So year 2, the school representatives that went were our school representatives that make up our county core trauma team. And our county core trauma team meets once a month. And in that county core trauma team, they are to bring us information back from their schools, as well as we can give them more information, more materials. If they need us to come in and do training, coaching, modeling, that's our time to talk about that. And when we just recently had social workers hired within our county, they were invited to become part of our county trauma team. And right now, we need this, and let's try this, and can we do this, and can we do this? So they're really excited about being on board. And then this past year, our established county trauma team with a couple of extra school representatives that make up that school trauma team all attended the Handle with Care conference. We come back, we debrief about it, we take things that maybe we didn't know, and we keep going with what we know we need to do for these kids. Ultimately, we know that if we do not change paradigms and culture, this will fail. If we cannot change how people perceive this, and that then they want to change, the adults, the they is the adults, that they want to change and embrace this will fail. You're going to have a classroom here and a classroom there that's going to do a great job, and that classroom's not going to have behaviors, and kids are going to perform for that teacher, but only that teacher. We know we have to have buy-in for this to occur. So the first thing we do in our initial trauma training, and every summer, all our new hires get to come on their new hire day, they get trauma training. We talk about ACEs. We give them that ACE test. We don't ever ask them to tell us their ACE score, but some of us tell them ours. And we tell them about how we know that affects who we are as adults, that affects what we've done as adults, and we know that ultimately affects how we deal with children. And for me to deal with this kid who has all of these behaviors and all of these emotions and they don't know what to do with it, I've got to know my own. I've got to be able to deal with my own so that I can deal with theirs. From the first year at the Handle with Care conference, they had a speaker, and her name was Susan Mullane, and she had been brought in because she had originally been brought in to Cabell County to do some work when the heroin crisis first really hit national papers. And she was then at the Handle with Care conference, and we asked her if she would be willing to come in and train us. And so she came in, and that was a blended project with our title programs director, in which then she trained our core team, as well as the majority of our staff in this initial trauma training, and helped us make the first presentation to our board about what we needed to do. And the first thing that we presented to the board, and where we were moving very district-wide, was called personal prep education. And that what we wanted was their support, that teachers could take the first 5 to 10 minutes of their class and personally prep. And we talked about how that could be done in a variety of ways, where it can be up and moving and doing breathing exercises, or finding things that kids then self-select to self-regulate to get them in their mind ready to go. And that was very successful. And also, in changing the perspective, we wanted to make things very commonplace. We wanted to make certain things just a part of everyday instruction. So the first one was fidgets. And I know people, it's toys. We don't want them to play with toys. Has anyone noticed how many times I've done this? I can't sit here and have a fidget and talk, so I'm using the remote because I can't stand still. Can I? No. Can I sit still? No. Is it sometimes annoying? Okay. If I have a fidget, do I also then shake my leg if I have a fidget? Not as bad, right? I can pay better attention, right? If you take it away from me, how then more is it? Okay. I'm completely okay with my staff going, Because in the beginning, they are toys and they're interesting. And I can notice some of you that took the fidgets out of the middle of the table, and I know you're paying attention because I still have those attention markers that I can see, like your head and your eyes, but you're messing with things with your hands. Not all of you did, because not all of you need them. But if we can work and train our staff on how to use fidgets appropriately in the classroom and how to make it a part of their culture, then that's one thing that we can do, because it allows them to do what they need to do. We also highly encourage the use of baby dolls. Why? So there is this idea of baby doll therapy, because what we know is that if I hand you a baby doll, nearly everybody responds in a specific way. Like, how are you going to hold that baby? Are you going to hold it by its leg and shake it? Really? But because we do. We will automatically hold a baby doll appropriately to if it was a baby. We just do. And so the use of baby dolls within our preschool curriculum, within open centers in our younger grades, and Jessica can even tell you as a high school counselor, our high schoolers will hold it while they try to talk to her. It is something that we understand is soothing and helps them to reconnect. Books. Books. We are big on books and bibliotherapy. We will look for books all the time that will connect and teach behaviors. We want our teachers to have that story time. When I taught high school, and I finished up my teaching career at the time at Poca High School before I came over to Lincoln County, I read to my students every single day. I had a block schedule, 15 minutes at the beginning of every single period I read to my kids. And I chose books like The Noticer by Andy Andrews, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, and we would use the activities. But do you know that I had their full attention for that entire 15 minutes when I read to them? So we encourage our teachers to find books appropriate to what they need and that age level and read to your kids. Connect with them. We know that Lincoln County, when we look at our standardized scores, we have a couple of hits on things we can't do anything about. We know that our tests are currently on the computer. So we know that their scores can be directly correlated to whether or not they have a computer in the home, not a smartphone, not a tablet, not the internet, but a computer. We know their scores are also directly related to their SES level, and we have between 65 and 100% poverty rate in every single one of our schools. And we also know that their success rate on a computerized standardized test is directly related to how often they were read to before the age of 5. Can't do anything before the age of 5, but we can encourage our teachers to read to them every day. And so we go out and we look for books. We'll stand, in Walmart looking for different books, and Target, and we'll look on Scholastic, and we'll go online, and we will put those books out in their hands and go, just read to them every day. Even if it's 5 or 10 minutes, read to them every day. We use puppets, and we train our teachers to use puppets to get kids to identify with emotions outside of themselves. Why do we get defensive about things? Like when people want to talk about emotions and if it's something that's close to us, we all kind of curl in, right? Like we literally going to be like a turtle and we're going to pull our head in, right? When we get defensive, right? But if I say, are you being defensive? No, I'm not being defensive. Okay? So we use different animals and just the characteristics of animals to talk about emotions and how we react to things, to get kids to understand what their emotions, what they're feeling then. So a couple months ago, I went into a first grade classroom to coach and model with the use of puppets. And first thing is like when I got the puppets, the kids are like, oh, we have puppets. Okay, so we start talking about what characteristics, like the turtle, when we pull in, when we get defensive, or porcupine, when we feel attacked, we throw things, okay? For some kids, it's throwing actual things or throwing their words. Or dragons, when they breathe fire and they get huge and big and mean. And we talk about how all these animals then react to a situation. And then we start talking. Well, then how do you, what animal are you when this happens to you? And guess what? When they can point out that animal, they can start identifying their emotions. And when they can start identifying their emotions, then they're able to start talking about things when things happen to them. We also then have Zendaway cubes. So those are kind of a roll of chance dice that give them starts for either writing prompts or discussion prompts within the classroom. So if they've designated time within their classroom schedule to do some character-based education, these are one of the things that we give them to help structure that time. Worry munchers, and Mike went, is that really what that's called? And it's a stuffed animal that has a zipper mouth and it hangs. And so what we ask them to do is that when kids come in and they have worries, they draw or write what their worry is, they put it in the worry muncher, they zip it up, and then that worry muncher is going to hold it for the rest of the day. You don't have to. I know it works because I bought my children worry munchers. And my children were all dealing with a situation last year at this time, and so I went and found worry munchers and I brought them home and I gave them each of them and I said, I know you don't want to tell me sometimes what you're feeling because you think it's going to hurt my feelings. I want to tell you, you can't tell me anything that's going to hurt my feelings or change how I feel about you, but what I really need you to do is to express what you're feeling. So if you don't think you can tell me, I want you to draw the picture or write it out and put it in here. I promise I'm never going to look in it, but this is yours. And I noticed that the fights I was breaking up between my children were getting less. Recently switched their bedrooms and I found one of their worry munchers under the bed. So I decided to look at it. So I open up and I pull it out and my children just said things like, I'm sad today because I don't get to see my dad, but I know mom's keeping me safe. It's in there. And I start thinking about when she would have written that. And I'm going, kids need an outlet at home, at school. Because guess what? If she didn't have an outlet at home, she was going to take that to school. And if you have met my oldest middle child, that's a little dangerous at times, okay? She's the child that you can put football pads on, she'll be all stately. That's how she rolls. If she doesn't get that out, she's going to get it out somehow. You cannot bottle all that up and not expect kids to act that out. They can't talk it out. If they can't get that out, they will act it out. And they have a lot to get out. The roll game, as well as yoga cards, we give those to our teachers as well as our counselors to try to work in some more structured activities for them to take in that personal prep time, as well as some character education. Our emotion cards with our display materials about emotion is that we want the ability to talk about emotion as easy as it is about math. Because we don't turn off our emotions when we go to school. We don't. If you have a really bad day and you go into your office, are you kind of maybe in a bad mood the rest of the day anyway? And things are difficult for you or different? Kids aren't any different. We want to make talking about emotions as easy as math and science. And so we try to coach and teach our teachers about how to use emotions within their content. So one of the examples that we give them is the Declaration of Independence pops up in our standards for history throughout their time. Okay? So we can do this as a primary activity, a middle school activity, or a high school activity based on their level. And we can all talk about the Declaration of Independence and who signed it and what it said. But did anyone ever ask you what they felt like when they signed the Declaration? Or what it felt like to be a villager to read the Declaration? Or what did the king feel like when he read that Declaration? That all played a part within the Revolutionary War. Their emotions did. how they felt at those moments. So we'll use these emotion cards that also have a variety of vocabulary on the back. And so we tell them, I was like, pick something that you already teach. But what you're teaching is very systematic. It's black and white. It's content. It's dates. This happened. This is the person that did it. It's the who, what, where. I said, let's throw this in there. Who would have been amazed at reading the Declaration of Independence? And we've already studied it, and so my teachers are then going, well, okay, we think that the king could have really been amazed that they actually had the courage to write that. Okay, that's fair. Said, okay, who would have been maybe tired or disinterested or not involved in the Declaration? And then they start naming me countries that they didn't care. They were established countries at the time, but they really didn't care what England and the future United States were going to do. Okay? Who would have felt sick reading or signing the Declaration? And this one, and then the scared one, and they go, well, wouldn't the people that signed it partially feel that way? Okay, why? Well, because if they failed, they were going to die. Yeah, that would probably make you feel sick to your stomach. So then, based on their programmatic level, I said, what assignment can you give? Can you write and explain who would feel this emotion and why, and back it up with those facts you've already taught them? And they all go, wait, that makes sense. We have to make emotions a part of what we teach for this to make sense, because so many of us then get there and we don't have words because we don't know how to talk about emotions either. So if we can embed emotions within their content, we're about halfway there. So with what we have been doing, we start moving from established programs like Save the Journey, CPI, to developing our own blueprint. What does that look like? Well, that looks like what we're trying to make it. Things that we recognize and we know need to change. So the first one was, it's no longer your kids, it's no longer their kids, it's our kids. Every single kid is our kid. And we are very upfront with that. SAT is not special ed. SAT is everybody. 504 is not special ed. 504s are not special ed. They're everybody. And I said, if we have to give an IEP for every single kid that has suffered trauma, is trying to figure that out in the classroom, we're going to have nearly 100% of kids on IEPs. But they don't need specialized instruction. What they need us to be is good teachers that know how to be trauma-informed. That's what they need. So that's what we're going to do. So these are no longer, these are your kids and these are your kids. They're all of our kids. And when I ask them what they teach, they better tell me they teach kids. And they better tell me that they teach all of our kids. And I go, who else teaches kids? Because we don't stop with just our professional staff. We encourage and we ask for service staff to come as well. Because who's the first face that they see? The bus driver, who I would never take their job. I don't care how much you pay me. I couldn't do that, okay? Massive respect for bus drivers. That's the first face they see. So do we want our bus drivers to be trauma sensitive and trauma informed? We do. After they get there, the second face that they most likely see may be somebody on bus duty, but who gives them their breakfast when they arrive? A cook. So we have to have our entire staff take ownership of all of our kids. Now, and I'm going to say this, is that we don't do that perfectly. We have some schools that do a really good job. We have some schools that we're really trying to still get on board with those things, but we know it works. Embedding emotions within the content, owning our own trauma, and identifying bucket fillers within our relationships with each other and our students. Now, Jessica can tell you that I have bounced ideas off of her on this one since last week. Because I said, I don't know how to do this part. She goes, but it's important. I said, but I really don't know how to do that in this room. And she goes, just do it like you did in any other room because it's important. So that's what I'm going to do, even though my social anxiety tells me don't do this. Okay? So bucket fillers within our relationships. Have you ever, in the classroom, praised a kid and they didn't care? You could praise them all day long. Every single time you caught them doing something good, you praised them and it didn't matter. Who? Okay? You ever have a kid and you're like, you can get in the prize box. All you got to do is 3 good things. You can get in the prize box. I don't want to get in that prize box. Who has ever had a kid that did not want to get in a prize box? There's a theory that we all give and reciprocate love and appreciation. And guess what? When you work with your students, that's an act of love. Okay? That we give and reciprocate in 5 different areas. And we often give how we want to be reciprocated. But if I don't understand what you're giving me, it's the same as you not doing it at all. So some kids will really respond to words and praise. You have kids that you tell them a good job, they light up. Okay? You have some kids that are really going to respond to working towards something tangible. They'll work for that prize box. They will work for those identified stickers. They will do that. But you have kids that all they want in the morning is a high five or a hug. That's what they want, right? A high five or a hug. That's what's going to drive them. You have kids that all they want to do is spend time with an adult. Do you have those? Okay, that like when they get that like one time with you, and they will do anything to get that one-on-one time with you, but that lights them up for the rest of the day. That doesn't mean that the kid that wants in the prize box won't respond to praise, but it's likely that he won't respond as well to the prize box. So ask yourself, what would you respond to? And every single one of you will respond to something different. And how you respond in a friendship is different than how you respond in your student-teacher relationship, which is different than how you may respond with your own children or your grandchildren or your nieces or nephews. And it's going to be different than how you would respond with your partner or your spouse. But we train our teachers on how to use the 5 love languages. And we have them take notice on who they are and what do they feel. What makes them want to do more? What makes them connect? And then we ask them to identify 5 different ways they can use that in their classroom. So a lot of times that is they can earn eating lunch with me because that's quality time. They can earn more praise because that's words of affirmation. They can earn the high five and the fist bump because that's physical touch. And we ask them to have their students self-select on their own as well. If you do something really, really well and you get a reward, what do you want out of these 5 things? Because oftentimes when we also give them a choice of reward, we give them all the same 5 things in the same category, right? They can get this or this or this or this out of the prize box. Well, all of that is getting gifts. And some people don't respond to that. So we want teachers to own their own. We want them to own it within their classroom. And we'll have some teachers. We do what's called a new special education teacher cohort, which is, you skip one. So we have a shortage of special ed teachers like everybody else. We hire on alternative certification. And those teachers come in once a month to our central office and they work with me. For an entire day, they come in and they work with me. And some days it's about compliance, like it's IEP season for us, so it's a lot about compliance. And then in the beginning, it's a lot about establishing your classroom, establishing relationships, trauma-informed care, working with your coworkers. But at the end, I always ask them to reflect, and I never ask them to put their name on it, because I've also found that if I tell them not to put their name on it, they're much more honest with me. And without a doubt, for the past 3 years that we've done this cohort, the number one influence that they said changed how they connect with kids in their classroom and created a more positive experience for them to connect was learning about the love languages and how to use that in their classroom. So we know that very simple things have changed how we work with our kids. We also have to identify self-care within our interventions. Tuesday, before I came up, I was actually at a meeting at one of our schools, and part of our plan for this child was the teachers check-in, check-out, because she's doing a great job. This kid's a handful, and she's doing an awesome job, and we're seeing progress, but even the progress is really difficult to kind of take in. And so within his plan is her identified 3 people that she can message when she needs to tap out. And it's known. She sends them that message, she's got time to step out of that room. Why? Because for our teachers to essentially to go into a battlefield every single day, they need to know who they can count on. And so we have to have self-care within our interventions. And then finally, and this was really coming out of the title programs and the fact that we have designated comprehensive schools, is we now have social workers at every single school in our county. The State Department allowed us to use comprehensive funds to fund social workers, and then that allowed us to use some creative flipping and get social workers at our other schools. So we have social workers hired at every single school in our county. Okay, I was told I have to give you all a break, and this is a really good place for me to take a break, because when we come back, it goes into our video of the perspective from our district. So it's a really good time for us to break. I know that the break is like 10-15 minutes, and the food and drinks are out there. Wash your breath. What will play the video?
I think you click it.
If I just click here, like I'll come back over here.
It's the mouse. It's right here, right?
Oh, yeah.
Off to your right. And
Okay.
it's over there on the screen there. And you click the video.
Okay.
And then when the video's done, it'll be a black screen. I think you hit the right arrow or the right arrow on there
Okay.
and go to the next slide.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. One of the things that one of my cohorts kind of pointed out to me was that when Vic was getting, introducing me and said, and she'll introduce her staff. I've been pointing them out, but I never introduced them. And when Mike goes, well, why didn't you do that? I said, because their introduction slide's at the end, and it wasn't at the slide, and I don't know what to do about that. And he goes, well, you kind of should have done that already. I said, well, then I guess I'm going to have to make that right. So the first person sitting here, her name is Legia Dooley. She is our occupational therapist for our county. Next one is Meredith Ramey. She is our preschool special needs and West Virginia birth to 3 transition facilitator. Jessica Fry, she is our counselor at Lincoln County High School. Jason Cheek, he's our itinerant teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing PK through 8 and our itinerant teacher of autism. And this is Mike McCormick. He is our TIS, as well as kind of like the jack of all trades to come and do these things to help us out. And he helps Jessica at Lincoln County High School with their positive behavior support plans, as well as kind of everything that they do for the social emotional well-being of our kids. So we created a video, because I can't bring everybody from my county that has helped us in this initiative, but we created a video that allowed them to really kind of talk to you a little bit about where we came from, what we're doing now, why it's important to our district, and why it's important to them. So that is what we are going to start out with.
Well, I think we have to realize that trauma is not something new. It's been around. We've just decided that it's something that needs to be addressed.
We've been enlightened as to why our children are having so many problems here at school. We now are aware that trauma affects their ability to walk into a classroom and sit down and pick up a pencil. As I say, when our kids get picked up off the streets and then they come to school the next day, they're expected to learn when there's been violence in the home.
Every day, there's something in their life that has caused them trauma. There's not many who aren't traumatized. Just speaking of what we've learned, what traumatized means, like through the ACE score and things of that nature, yes, it affects me. I automatically, I get to know them. Why are they traumatized? How can I help them?
When we bring the teachers in for that initial training, and they're exposed to the ACEs, and realizing where they score on the ACEs test, and knowing that they themselves may have had some trauma in their life, it's eye-opening. The other thing is when they realize how severe some of the trauma that our kids come from. But I think really it's the awareness that what our kids are faced with and the excess baggage that they're bringing to school. It's not an excuse for a high expectation, but it's a reality in that to understand where they're coming from and meeting them where they are. But if they're in survival mode, it takes a little bit of time, a little bit of effort to get there.
Overall, the impact has been good. It's just been more of teachers having to come to terms with their own trauma and their own reasons that they do the things that they do, and the reasons that their thinking is why it is. For some teachers, that's made them very empathetic. That's made them very understanding and very, really have their hearts broken for some of these kids.
What I think about when working with teachers, it's not about adding something new to their plate or feeling like that we're giving them additional jobs. It's basically giving them tools or resources of what they're already doing, but maybe rephrasing it in a way of, I'm not adding something extra, but here's a skill that you can use.
I feel like since the trauma initiative started in this county that it's definitely gotten a lot more intense. We've went deeper into things, but since I've changed into special ed, I feel like for certain this population has a lot more of the kids with those kind of issues than you see in general ed.
We've done a lot of CPI and instructing to help decrease and de-escalate situations that may happen through children that come from backgrounds where they haven't been taught how to deal with settings or deal with situations instead of just hitting and fighting and punching and yelling and screaming. So it's like there's a big generational gap where not only is teaching anymore, it's just not ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. We're teaching them how to use manners and how to work with one another and how to use feelings and empathy and those sort of situations. Those have been the two biggest in the last 4 years here in Lincoln County.
I think until we started the trauma training, a lot of people were just like, well, these kids just need to get it together. There's no reason for them acting this way. But with the trauma training, I think it has enlightened a lot of people as to why that child might be having behavior problems, why that child is upset that morning, why he's acting out or she's acting out. We also understand now that they may be hungry. And we've learned to look at the kids a little bit different. We've looked at the whole child, no longer just looking at the academic part of it.
I try to look more at where they're coming from and discuss with them what's going on at home. If they're having a bad day, we'll talk about what's going on, and they'll open up more to me now because I feel like I know some of the questions more to ask them, and just being aware of what all goes on in our community and with our students, because you don't know, you have no idea what they're dealing with at home unless you talk to them and get that trust for them to confide in you.
I think the trauma training that we've been through helps raise awareness about the perspective that our children, our students are living in and how their brains have developed and how you might interact with them as a teacher. It may be a different approach. You may not, it's not the way it was way back when. It's not like you have to say as a teacher, I want you to do this because I'm the teacher and because I set the rules and this is what they are and you follow them.
A child is not going to be able to retain anything until they feel safe in an environment. Until they can trust you, know that you're going to take care of them, that they have a feeling that they can sit and learn and they're safe for maybe 8 hours in a day, 6 hours a day, half a day, however long they're here. Until those children feel that they're safe and they let those guardians down, those walls down, and they get into that frame of mind and that mindset that they can relax and be a kid again, then the learning can really start. Not until then.
I think my goal with this is to hopefully make the students feel safe and comfortable in the environment at school, and that is somewhere where they can be supported and that the teachers and the administration are there, and that they care about them. They want to help them. They want to, make a difference in their life.
We had a young lady that was in the custody of her father that enrolled here. he decided he didn't want her anymore. So he gave her to Mom. A couple days later, we get a phone call at school, and Mom says, I don't want her either. You all just tell her not to ride the bus home. Tell her I don't want her to come here, but you all take care of it. So as a school, we were the actual people that had to sit down with the student and say, you know, we're working on this. We're calling every social support system out there. We've got your back. But as of now, we can't legally do anything. And this is what Mom is saying. Now, this is a 14-year-old young lady who had to hear that from school staff on top of that new school staff, because she's a new student here, doesn't know us well. But we were the ones that had to break that news to her. Both parents are drug-addicted parents. She has been bounced back and forth. And this is a kid that I worry about that would fall through the cracks otherwise had we not experienced this, because she comes to school every day. Her grades are okay. She would not be a kid that I would walk down this hall and think, this kid, she's really got a bad life. She can play the role. She's learned the coping mechanisms. She's learned how to play the game. She's got all of that under control because she has parented her parents. So that is a true instance of some of the trauma that we deal with regularly. And that's not an isolated case. That's not something that happens once every 3 years.
We can never ever blame a child. We can never blame, especially, I know as they get older, they have choices. Children have choices as they get older. But you have to be old enough to make that choice. You have to be able to understand that I can be different. But that comes with a long, hard road. You're not, a 6-year-old cannot, or even a 5 or 4-year-old cannot walk in and be ticked off or be scared to death from the night before. And they can't say to themselves, I have a choice. I can walk into that classroom today, or I can sit here and scream my head off and throw. It's like we have to teach them. We have to teach them a lot of things that are not taught at home for various reasons. And you can't blame the parents, because some of the parents are just in situations they're doing the best they can.
We do have an issue with trauma. I think that it's a realization that it's going to take time, and it's going to take some thinking way outside the box. We can no longer really depend on a traditional setting. And we've got to be willing to take the time and to provide the training to teachers, to paraprofessionals, to anybody who works with these traumatized kids. If they don't understand where they're coming from, we can't reach them. These kids are coming to us with some serious issues, and we have got to take the time to let them build that trust with us so that they want to come to school, they're engaged, they feel safe, and when they do that, then the student's going to have some success. Will they all be Einsteins? No. But will they be able to grow? Yes. And that's what we want. We want to provide the best opportunity to give our children and our teachers and other staff members an opportunity to grow.
One of the things that we want to bring up is that we really got a lot of momentum within this initiative. And you saw Mr. King, he's our federal programs director, when he kind of took his own little spin of what he could do, and he brought in the Leader in Me program to our district. So we have Leader in Me across all of our schools, and he completely funds that part. And so he was looking for something that could help with the social emotional piece and tie in what we were doing. And he really brought in that Leader in Me part and growing those leaders and using those 7 habits to make that language very commonplace within what we're doing. The other part is that we work really hard to make this gen ed with special ed. So when we do our initial trauma training for our new hires, that's all of our new hires. When we talk about what we can do to embed emotion into content, when we talk about how we do personal prep time, how do we make these relationships with these students, this is gen ed and special ed. They all come. And the way that I explain to them as to why that's important, so is that I have this class, and every one of my staff members has one in their office. And I tell them that when they get approached by someone that says, this needs to be a special ed thing, I said, get out the glittery balls. So in here are 7 different colors, because there's 7 days in the week. And there are 24 of each color. So this represents all the hours in a week. And so if a kid has 1 hour of special ed a day, and I take out 5, there's all this time he's not in special ed. But if I take out all the hours that we have him from the time they get on the bus to go home, I have to hold it like this when I pour it out of the jar. This does not have the same impact as everybody working together. And so we explain to them that it has to be that we're all in, that we all have to own this. And so we're very lucky that we got our federal programs director on board. And so when we approach this, a lot of things happen and we do it together. It becomes very blended. So our future plans. One is that we are working on a collaborative project with Peachtree Therapy Center. Peachtree Therapy Center is located in Barboursville, West Virginia, in the old East Pea Ridge Elementary School. There are 5 certified trauma play therapists in the state, and she is one of them. And she and us, we are working together to create curriculum guides that can be used PK through 12 to kind of very systematically, here is in your hands how you can start and do this, along with implementation of policy referencing things within 2419, 2510 with MTSS, and 4373 with expected behavior in safe and supportive schools, because we do have content standards for behavior. And one of the things that we hear from our teachers, or what we did hear was, I'm not allowed to teach behavior. Yes, you are. And here's the content standards for it. And so we trained our teachers in the content standards of behavior so that they felt empowered that they could do this, and this is why. I can teach this, not just because my kids need it. I can do it because I even have standards that go along with it. So that's our collaborative project. We are working on our central office clothing and supply pantry that now has a home, in which that if there is a need at the school that they can't service in their own pantries, all they need to do is phone us and we can get it out to the school, whether that's clothing, supplies, or food. And this really kind of came out of a situation where we felt like we needed one in the central office when it was 2 Decembers ago that 2 of our kids, one of them was a PK kid of ours, that was when PK was in our central office, and a primary student at Hamlin couldn't go home. And they couldn't go home because their home had turned into a crime scene when they had been at school, because their father murdered their mother and had stabbed her and slit her throat. And so they couldn't go home. What also hadn't happened that day is that the little girl hadn't taken her backpack to school. And so she didn't get to get her backpack back because it became part of evidence because there was blood on it. So we had received a donation of backpacks from Walmart, and so we were able to bring her into the office, and we had toys and we were playing with her. And we go, we can give you a new backpack. Would you like one? And we bring out the backpacks, and guess what? There was one that matched what her mom had bought her. And so she got to have her backpack and have that security of that. So we work really hard to work on that central office clothing pantry, because we're there even when the schools aren't. we work all year so that we have that opportunity to support them. Our countywide bus ride. Our high school has done this more than once, and it is an eye-opening experience because we don't take them down Route 10 and Route 3. We take them down the hollers that when you back up and try to turn around, because there's not a place to turn around, half the bus is like off the road in a ditch. And we go through things, and sometimes we don't actually make them do this, but we tell them we were going to, is we want to split them up in math and science in one bus, and fine arts and social studies and English in another bus, and we get worksheets from either one, and we flip them because most of our math teachers don't like English and most of our English teachers don't like math. And we give them to them, we're like, you need to finish this by the time you get to school because this was your homework. And we know you couldn't have done it last night because your parents were fighting and you were trying to get something to eat, but you've got to finish it. You've got that 45-minute ride back to the high school. You've got to finish it. Well, I didn't bring a pencil. Well, that's your fault. But that's not what it doesn't matter. Everybody's got to do it. Inevitably, somebody usually gets sick on the bus ride because it is not an easy one, but it is eye-opening for them because they look outside and they see where these children live. And then they are then put in the place of what they've asked their students to do. Yes, Mike?
On this last bus ride that we couldn't begin this year, we ended up dropping off 3 teachers because they got so sick. We literally just dropped them off at the foot of the hill, and our school nurse got off with them, and she lived up the road, and she walked the 2 miles up to her driveway to get her car to drive them back to school. But they literally had to get off the bus because they were so sick.
Yeah. And we do that, and we continually offer that, and our transportation director is great to get a bus driver to haul them out there, because sometimes we lose the perspective because we go home. And even though we all probably in an element live paycheck to paycheck because you spend what you have, we all have a home that has running water and electricity and food in the fridge. And if we don't have food in the fridge because we're not home, we can at least go out to the restaurant and get something. And we have clean clothes. But so many of our kids don't. And sometimes we need that jolt of reality. And that's in every single county. Every county has that in West Virginia, even our most affluent. I will use this as an example because I graduated from Poca High School and then I worked in Putnam County, and Putnam is affluent. It has several affluent areas, right, Charlotte? But I could take you out where some of my friends lived, out Poca River Road and out the haulers, out Heiser Creek, and you're going to see the same type of situations we see out our haulers in Lincoln County. Poverty knows no geographic boundary, and all of our counties have that. We are working on curriculum guides within our office to go with some pop pieces, and pop culture pieces is what I'm talking about. Because we have to quit being ostriches when the pop culture world identifies something, but then we say, hey, we can't deal with that. When we say, hey, we can't deal with that, we're losing the opportunity of our kids reaching out. So we're working on, sometimes we look for curriculum guides that have already been established, or we will write our own with pop culture pieces that come up, including the mini-series in the book, 13 Reasons Why. And that's really what got us started in thinking that we need to be able to put something in our teachers' hands, because when our kids make that effort to say, I relate to this because, we need to know what to do in response. Human trafficking workshop. When I first mentioned human trafficking in the first presentation that I ever did on our TraumaInformed, I got, we don't have that in West Virginia. Yes, you do. In the past 2 months, you have seen news articles released every week about the rise of sex trafficking and human trafficking in West Virginia. Because the first thing that sex trafficking and human trafficking is that we have to understand is we have to understand what it is, and it means that someone is being used for sex in response of something that someone else wants to get. So we have parents that traffic their children for drugs. So I don't have the money to pay for it, so I'm giving my child to this drug dealer to have their use with them so I can get my fix. That occurs. And I will tell you, and if I can't get through this, the hardest day that we have had in this county was when we realized one of ours had been trafficked. We found out about it on the news article, and we missed it. We missed his warning signs. He was already identified as one of ours. He had he was not nonverbal, but he had language difficulty. He had services every week and every day. He was very overweight, and he had a lot of food interactions. We had a health care plan for him, so we missed the fact that he was soiling himself as a response to the fact he was being sex trafficked. Because every sign we had identified in his IEP that we were addressing because we thought it was something else. But he was being trafficked. And we found out the day that the police went to go arrest his dad. So we need to know better sometimes. We need more from people that we need the people that it's their job to train people in human trafficking and sex trafficking to come in and talk with us so we can train. And we know that we don't have all the answers, because the hardest day was the day that we realized we missed every single one of those signs. So we know that we need to do more in the area of human trafficking and sex trafficking in West Virginia. We will continue our professional development and support. We do have different subjects that we do based on what schools ask us to come in and their time period. We do have our initial trauma training. We do have a training about NAS and drug dependency, because babies aren't born drug addicted, they're born drug dependent. We have several staff members that volunteer at Lily's Place and give us another perspective of these babies that are coming in and that we already have in our schools. Human trafficking and going along with personal safety for students, mindfulness, self-care for staff, and of course coaching and modeling as our teachers get farther along in this initiative. No, I do not want to update. Thank you. There. So one of the things that we'll have several slides on is because I can't bring them to you. I cannot pull one of, Mike, there it goes, okay. I cannot take a calming space out of our county and dump it here for you all to kind of go and explore. So we're going to talk about it, we're going to show you lots of pictures and explain why our calming spaces are designed the way they are. We originally got the idea for a calming space after several of us went to do a visit at the West Virginia schools for the deaf and the blind. We wanted to go visit for multiple reasons. One, we had a student there that we missed dearly, and we really wanted to see him. I also then had 2 children with hearing loss and wanted to look into short course with them, and I wanted to see where they were going to be. And we were already seeing an influx of kids with vision and hearing loss based on the opioid epidemic. And so we wanted to really get into the options with people that this is really what they specialize in, because we have 1 teacher of the visually impaired and we have 1 deaf ed teacher for PK through 8 and 1 for the high school. They don't have a lot of ability to collaborate. So we wanted to go up and visit. And so we were able to do so and stay there for a couple days. And we then got to experience their sensory room that was set up, and that started our wheels turning about calming spaces. And 7 of our 8 schools now have spaces. Our first one was West Hamlin Elementary, and our most recent has been Midway Elementary and Lincoln County High School. They were being built at the same time. So when we went to the West Virginia Schools for the Deaf and Blind, it was in their multi-sensory program. And so we were asking all these questions. We went into this room that had all this really cool stuff, and we were asking about it. And it was designed for students that had a variety of sensory challenges. Typically, they had hearing and vision loss and something else. A lot of they were telling us about the kids that were using different pieces of that equipment. Several of them had a sensory loss as well as autism or an intellectual disability. Talked about how they continued to address communication needs for their students and how the students could advocate and not just have scheduled times to be there. And it was very kind of eye-opening to watch that it was really tailored to that child. There were lots of options in there, but they knew which child liked what and what preferred kind of what was going on. And we were completely inspired, but unbelievably overwhelmed because I asked how much that equipment cost, and they started telling me kind of some of the amounts, and it quickly was adding up over $25,000, and I'm like, I just don't know where that is. So we were quite overwhelmed about what we could do with this, but very inspired with what they were able to do, and wondered if we could kind of figure out what we could do to offer something to our students, because we knew that our students were coming to us and they couldn't self-regulate. So the first one that we built was at West Hamlin. And this was because our principal had several students that they had tried everything. Like if you set up that behavioral strategies intervention list, they had done them all. And they weren't having any success with getting them to calm back down. Like if the kid was kind of set off, we couldn't bring him back down. And trust me, I mean, like, I had asked for that documentation. I'm like, did you do this? Yes. Did you do this? Yes. I mean, and it wasn't working. So the principal goes, if you guys are willing to build it, I'll give you a space. I am willing to try anything. And so as the new special ed director, I'm like, ooh, the principal actually wants me in the school. Okay. And so we go over to West Hamlin. And it was probably our hardest one to build because we were trying to figure out how things worked. We did figure some things out, like what worked really well to go over the floor, as well as what did and did not work to cover lights, what kind of seating was really appropriate and smoothing, and what did kids self-select versus what we thought was calming. But we also realized that it had to be a part of a culture shift. These rooms could not stand on their own and be used. There had to be additional professional development, coaching, support, and that tie-in to all the classrooms for this to work. We also noticed that lighting made a big difference, that there needed to be several different lighting options. So we have light covers like they showed in that video that Troy showed at the end where they don't have those harsh ones. They have that. So I'm going out of the box, Mike. So we purchase light filters, and we can get several different colors. And these light filters are in every single calming space, but they are also available to every single classroom. So if a teacher is willing to put light filters to kind of make the harshness of the lights go away, they get these light filters, which are completely approved by the state fire marshal, because there's a nice little piece of paper that if you tell them it's for a school system, they'll send it with you. That part's already done for you, just got to ask for the piece of paper. And so for some kids, just having a light cover works. For some kids, they need it to be dark, and then we have different types of lighting options. So this is kind of a fiber optic light as well as laser lights, and those are water speakers that have different lights. And so one of the things that we especially do with lighting is that we introduce it to kids when they're not upset, when we're having a good day. Because what do they like on a good day? They're still going to like that on not a good day, but they're more apt to be able to communicate with us about how that goes. Repairs have to be done. So on Tuesday, we had to repair West Hamlin before we could head up here to Stonewall. Because in West Hamlin, the first thing that we had used is that we had used draperies very similar to what we had seen at the West Virginia Schools for the Deaf and Blind. State Fire Marshal didn't like it and they tore them down. So we had to go back in and redo the walls, but we had figured out that we could paint the walls the color that we need them to do. We also learned that too much seating is not what we want either, so we removed some seating and changed it around. And we also have a swing in that one and another one based on some needs of some specific students. So we will adapt and change rooms as we need as students come up, even though there are some very specific things that are in every single one. So Hearts was our next build, but we actually got a classroom size. This thing was huge. And so we had the ability to take up a ball pit. We had a ball pit in storage. It had been previously used with some students that no longer required that. And so I was like, well, let's take up the ball pit and let's see if we can incorporate that within our space and if that will be helpful. And they go, have you ever been in a ball pit? And I'm like, other than like McDonald's when I was little, they're like, it is completely calming. So we went up and we cleaned every single ball by hand. And got in there, and so I get in the ball pit and I'm like, oh, this is calming. I like this a lot. So we do have the ball pit in there. And we started trying to do kind of themes then in the room just to change them up a little bit, as well as to make it more palpable for general ed. Because if I say I'm going to the calming space, some people think that if I go to something, it's got to be special ed, okay? So if we tried to theme them, making that part of our everyday language, I just need to go out to outer space. And we have been using those terms, so kids are really, I gotta go to outer space. They're okay talking that way. So we try to use those themes to make that easier for the kids to discuss what's in there. We do have a lane surface in there, and this is the one that we get the most questions about. Why is it there? What do we do for protection, and why is it that way? So the first thing is, it's a lane surface, it's not a bed. Okay, it is a therapeutic designed piece of equipment that can hold up to 750 pounds. And the reason that we have a lane surface in there is because we have kids that when they've been up all night because of what's going in, they need a place to lay down. And so they can lay in there and sleep, because even if they sleep for 3-4 hours and get up and eat lunch and we can get afternoon work out of them, that's better than not getting any work out of them the entire day or getting suspended. So they're able to go in there and lay down. One of the legal precautions that we take is that every single one of these rooms has a 360-degree night vision camera that has continual recording feed. So nothing goes on in this room that we can't find out or be aware of. And when I say it's like night vision, Army spec, if someone takes in a can of pop, I can bring up the nutrition label. So on the lane surface and the camera, we do not cut any corners budget-wise. That is there to protect us, but also address their need. We do purchase it from a medical supply company. If you ever do this, deliver it to the school that it needs to go to. We didn't do that at West Hamlin. We delivered it to the central office. And I never thought we were going to get it back out off of like where the freight dropped it off. It was that heavy, that bulky, that ability to move. So make sure it goes to the school that it's going to stay. It's also very low to the ground, so there is not, no one has to have help to get on it. It's very hands-off in the way that you can use it, and you wipe it clean. So we have cleaning procedures for every one of these rooms as well, and one of those is that we have disinfecting wipes that if somebody uses that, and then you go back and you clean it up and you can wipe it clean. The dimensions of the one that we use that has the 750-pound limit is the same as like a queen-size bed. So that's another perspective of the Hearts room. We do encourage them all to have phones that directly phone into the school phoning system in case that there is an emergency. We also have walkie-talkies that are set up for each of our calming spaces, so that then the designated people in each school in their plan that can help assist with a child has a walkie-talkie, but we always want phones to be in there as well. At Guyan Valley Middle, this is our only standalone middle school, and so when we went in there, this was very different because we didn't want to take any of the kind of idea of what we were doing for primary or MPK, because they only have 6, 7, and 8. All of the rest of our middle schools are attached as a PK through 8 school. So this is themed the aquarium, and we always have to adapt to what we're given. We're not given prime space here. Okay, this one actually is across from our cafeteria. If I would remove those ocean scenes, you would see barred windows with plexiglass behind them. Okay, so we have to adapt to what we're given and think creatively to make the space welcoming and calming. Now, I will also say, because he does work at the department, if you find Jonah Atkins, tell him we found out it was not a prison. It was barred so people wouldn't kick the windows in. He had convinced me it's because it was used as a prison when the school was first built, but it wasn't. It's also, because it was a standalone middle school, we wanted to have a place for kids to be able to do their homework and have a counseling corner, and it was large enough so that we were able then to add that space in there with a table and chairs. One of the things that you can see is that we wanted to maintain kids' safety if they were in there, understanding that calming space means that you're calm when you leave, you may not be calm when you go in, and so the legs of the table have pool noodles around them. So if we have something that is hard, like the leg of a table, that we are concerned with safety if a child's very upset, we'll cut a pool noodle and put it around there to protect that. There was a lot of trial and error, actually a whole lot of error, when we were building these rooms. Like I just mentioned, the wall coverings, fire marshal hated that, so we had to start painting. There's all these rules about paint. And we had to learn that and get the appropriate paint that would go on cinder blocks and how that would be done. We first tried do-it-yourself light covers because all we knew is we wanted to make the harshness of the lights go away. We didn't know people like actually sold them and they were like cost efficient to buy them, so we tried to make them. That was horribly awful. And it's a whole lot easier for us just to purchase them, and they're a lot prettier, and they have the state fire marshal's seal of approval. Cleaning surfaces. We want to make sure that it's clean, and that once a kid has used that, and so we have protocols for how to clean those spaces. And we've also kind of learned some things are better than others on their ability to be cleaned. In the first one, we really thought a plasma globe would be really cool. Like, you know, when you touch them and it goes, okay? Yeah, that was bad. Don't buy those. Mainly because they break really easily, and the humming sound was not calming to anybody. Nobody liked it. So it advertises itself as something that's really cool. It didn't work really well. And so if we're ever trying something new in one of these rooms, we only buy one and we see if it works, because the plasma globes didn't work. Our water tubes and our fiber optics didn't work that we had purchased. And so when we get something, we're going to try it out first, and we only buy one because we found that sometimes it doesn't work. We also tried at West Hamlin that we thought if we put those glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, that would help with lighting. It doesn't at all, because the ceiling to the floor is too much of a difference. Good lighting with fiber optics and the water speakers worked a whole lot better. So that 3 hours that we took putting the glow-in-dark stars on the ceiling at West Hamlin, we never needed to do that again. And that when we were using themes, we have to also, you know, keep in mind what can stay and what cannot stay. Our outer space room, it took us a little bit of time to figure out how to get those sticky dots to actually stick and stay on the wall. And that may not sound like a big idea, but when you're tired and you've built this thing for 2 days, it becomes a really big thing because you get very, very frustrated. We also work on our budget, because when I speak and there are administrators in the room, I am inevitably asked, how do you pay for it? Because we all talk about there are budget cuts and what is going on there. So the first thing is that there are various ways that we make these rooms cost efficient. We can typically build a room for $2,500 or less, and that includes the camera and the laying surface. Okay? One is because we do most of the work ourselves, and I don't have to pay maintenance overtime out of my budget to do the pieces in the room. We get a lot of our pieces either from Oriental Trading, or we go out and look for things that make sense. So like the covers on those barred windows, those are shower curtains, because I needed something that matched, but that was durable, what was not, you know, fire retardant. And so shower curtains made sense. So that I can rig up and I can do that. Surprising shopping options, we don't order a lot through catalogs. We go out and try to find it. There are lots of stores that will have party bulbs and lasers that then if you look and see like the product number and go and look in catalogs, they're the same thing, but when they're advertised for sensory rooms for special ed, they're $500. But when I go to the mall at a place that I'm not going to say out loud in this type of environment, because it's a very sketchy type of store, but they do take tax exempt. They take P cards and tax exempt. I can get the same laser for $85. Now, first time I brought that back to our finance purchasing person, I thought she'd hit me. But anyway, and I said, I just saved us $400 some, and she went, mm-hmm. So, and we try to buy things in bulk. Things like fidgets and weighted blankets and those things that are in those rooms, we can save on shipping and sometimes get discounts when we buy in bulk. So we kind of know what we need at this point, so we get enough to take care of all the rooms at the same time. So then where does the actual money come from, budget-wise? One of the things that we were able to do was that we had never received some grants that we now apply for regularly. Previous directors hadn't applied for these grants and didn't know they were available. And so when we found out that they were available and we started applying for them, we were getting money in that isn't like free money, but it allowed us to maneuver and do things that we didn't typically do because we had never received the funds before. So one of the things is that I say you look for grants, and you look for grants that you can continue to write and to get. Also is that I don't know what everybody's Medicaid budget looks like, nor am I going to try. I do know that for us, we changed how we build, and we now maximize and build 100%. So when we had to project, decreasing our revenue by 75%, we only ended up decreasing our revenue by 30%. So what we had projected and what we had to operate under, we were then able when we received more money in, we're able then to use some funds. And then we also use funds from the blended programs with our title funds. Ultimately, if you want it, it's there. I will say that the first year that I was there, and they can tell you, I said no to a lot of things. If somebody wanted something, I needed to know why they wanted it. I didn't know what it was going to do. Why was it purposeful? Why do we need to spend that money? And we completely changed within special education how we use our funds and how our teachers asked for things. And that helped free up some money for us to do different initiatives and different pieces of our initiatives. But success, okay? And we do have data, and I'll talk a little bit about the numbers here in a second, but there's always that success with the kids that you want to talk about. And so when we were working on this, is what are those successes in these stories that we've used? We had some different kids that we realized this was the game changer for them. We had done these pieces, but they couldn't self-regulate still, so these rooms added that piece that they didn't have. And so our student B, she was in foster care. She had anger outbursts. And when we say outbursts, we're talking like chucking things across the room outbursts. It became the same safe space for her, where she started then to maneuver herself and go, I need to go there. And she'd still, have that anger. She'd get angry, but we weren't throwing things across the room, and we weren't hurting other kids anymore. And she was then starting to work through her emotions with the trusted adult that was in the room with her.
Is there always an adult in the room?
Yes. Yes. And that adult has like a walkie-talkie and a way to get out. We also make it known that this isn't just for students, it's also for staff. We had a staff member at one of our elementary schools pass away unexpectedly from a heart attack, and she was a title teacher, so she was in every single one of the classrooms. She had a relationship with every single teacher, and the teachers didn't want to take time off because they felt like they needed to be there for their students, but they were all at their limit. And so they had rotations, and they could tap out or they would take their planning, and they would go in there and they'd sit and they would calm down, and it would calm them down enough that they could go back out and teach their kids for the rest of the day. And I tell you that because when I say it has to be a part of a culture shift, it has to be a part of a culture shift. You can't have an adult in there with a student that is melting down if everybody hasn't taken ownership of what this is and why we have to do it. And so it's there for that use, and it allows everybody to kind of really pitch in and see that success along all of our students. We do have data logs in every single room. We want to track the data. We want to know who's in there, what behavior occurred to trigger this, what was the behavior that caused them to go in, or did they even self-select, hey, I need to go here. We want to know what you used in the room and how long you were in there. So one of our success stories is a student that has a severe form of autism when he was in elementary school. And when he would first go in there, we're talking he'd be in there for almost an hour still trying to calm down. We hadn't figured out what was going to work for him. When they finally figured it out, he'd go in there and he was out in 10-15 minutes. And so we were able then to track that data and show how those interventions changed and worked. And then when we're creating their behavior plans or behavior supports, we know we have our data then to help support that. We also track data like our referrals to special education, our special education percentages, our behavioral violations that are entered into WEVIS, and that allows us to see things over a span of time. One of my schools that has really dug in and over the past 2 years has completely transformed their school, essentially, used to have a special ed population of 23%. They now have a special ed population of 14%. They went from having the highest and second highest number of SAT referrals into special ed. Last year they had 5. So we're able then to see that data over periods of time, because one of the things that we're able to do as then when we're working with kids that have been exposed to trauma and we're treating this in SAT, then we're not getting those referrals and they're not becoming eligible. So we're also able to track the numbers that way. Things that you've got to have. You got to have some, tools. What are your tools in your toolbox that's going to have you come in and convince people that you need this? And what are your safeguards to protect yourself and your district? You've got to know that. Like I said, that we have that 360-degree night vision camera for those calming spaces. We also use policy 4373 to explain to them why they can teach behaviors. You have to know your safeguards to empower your teachers so that they feel safe that they can do this. Everything has procedures and data, document. We continue to train every year and multiple points in the year. And again, it's not just special ed, it's gen ed and special ed. Every school needs to have a point of contact, the person that you can go to and ask what's going on, what do we need to do, and ultimately you have to have that buy-in. Now when I get to that buy-in piece, inevitably someone says, I'm not going to convince so-and-so. Okay, but I'm not worried about convincing one person. I'm not worried about convincing 2 or 3 people. I'm worried about convincing your 80%. Because I can tell you that 10% of your schools or your staff will get on board because they just get on board. They're ready to go. They'll do it. You're going to have another 10% that aren't going to want to do it no matter what you tell them, no matter how you bribe them, no matter what you promise them, they're not going to do it. But that 80%, that one's in the middle, that if it works, it's worth their time, they can understand why, I've empowered them, yeah, they'll do it. But if I don't do those things, man, I'm just not dealing with this anymore. I'm not concerned with your 10% of your naysayers or even your 10% of your go-getters. I'm concerned of convincing your 80%, because if you have that 80 and you have that 10, you have 90% of your school. That will transform a school. If you focus on your 10%, you won't change anything. And it's going to be stressful, and it's going to be frustrating, and it's not going to work. But if you focus on your 80 and you get your 90, you will transform a school. So what now? Where are we going? What are we doing? Part of it is our vision. Our vision within this initiative is we want to change our core instruction and the climate of every classroom, where Lincoln County Schools no longer answers when I say, what do you teach? They don't say I teach math or I teach 2nd grade. They go, I teach kids, and I teach every part of kids. I teach them academically, I teach them mentally, I teach them socially, I teach them behaviorally. I teach kids. That's what I do. We also look out and we go, I know I should never stand here and have to tell you any of this. Trauma shouldn't be the focus of our conference. Trauma shouldn't be the focus of the ESC's conference in 3 weeks. Trauma shouldn't be what's on Ed Week on every single article that they're pointing. No, it shouldn't be. Adults should do better. Adults should do better. Adults should take care of children and do better, but they don't. I can say that it's not fair that our teachers have to change the way they've been teaching, and we're successful in teaching that way for decades. It's not fair. No, it's not. But we have to. And so we validate that emotion. You are completely right. You shouldn't have to change. Adults should have done better. We should have more options, and that child never should have experienced any of it. But they did. And so we have to change. We know knowledge is power, and we continually work to empower our staff. We know if they are empowered to know better, that then they can do better. We also accept that we're going to move a little forward and we're going to take a few steps back. And that's okay, as long as we don't stop. It's okay to try something that doesn't work. It's okay to go back to the drawing board. It's okay to fail. It's not okay to sit in our failure. And so we have to continue. And we continue to try to move forward. And so that's how we know that this is working. I asked several of my teachers if they had the opportunity to stand here, what would they tell you? And 2 of them came up with something that I had to share. Our world has changed, and somehow we have to help our children fight through and not become a spoke in the perpetual wheel of addiction, hunger, and helplessness. We have to give them the tools to battle every single day, help them to hang on and never let go, because they are worth every minute, every hour, and every day that we can give them. We have to see them through different eyes, not the eyes of a world that we inhabited 30 years ago. They are still children, though they have grown up and sometimes have experienced more than we will ever see or know. We have to see the child, love them beyond the struggles. Their view will never change if we don't open the doors and windows and show them, I love my kids and I love my job. These kids are not lost. They are not broken. They have hope. They are strong. They are loving and have beautiful hearts. And if I could tell anyone about my kids, I would tell them that. I am so lucky to be their teacher. Those are my teachers. They are the ones that bought in and do that every day. Every day they get up and they go back into their battlefield. And it works because they want it to work. That's what they do. I did bring a panel of some of my staff because I think sometimes we have questions that you might not want to know my perspective or my answer, but you might want to hear from them or have some specific questions to them individually, and I have introduced them. But I do have a couple of questions that we get asked a lot, and we'll let whatever panel member or multiple ones want to answer them that we get asked. And then if you guys have questions for them or me, it's kind of set up as like an open panel discussion, because if you have the questions, someone else probably does. So, Mike, do you have their mic? Are we just using teacher voice? Okay. All right. So, for you all, what are the biggest changes or impacts that you've seen within our trauma initiative, within not only your role or what you see in the classrooms?
Okay, I'll start. I'm the preschool special needs itinerant evaluator, teacher, and then I'm also the West Virginia Birth and Free Transition Coordinator. Prior to, thanks Mike, prior to taking this position, I worked with Birth to Three for about 5 years as a developmental specialist in Lincoln County. So I really kind of got out. I have family from Lincoln County. I'm not personally from there, but I'm close from there. And so I really spent some time in home visits, getting to know people, seeing, kind of really what life is like out there. And since this initiative has started, I have seen a lot of those things that we were just seeing at some few kind of sketchy homes is kind of bleeding out into everything. And it's not so much a hidden thing anymore. It's right across the street from the school. It's, the police are at the school. It's everywhere all the time. So that's been the biggest thing, is just that even our little kids aren't getting to be kids, and they aren't having normal little kid problems. They're having big people problems that they are in no way equipped to have and solve.
Next.
Well, I'm at the high school, so I would like to probably tell you that things are a little different. But what I've realized through this is that high schoolers are, 16, 17, 18-year-olds trapped in minds of 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. They play with these toys. They hold those puppets for hostage. They take selfies with them, even the adults in the school. We kind of struggled at the beginning, trying to we're the biggest school in the county, so it was how are we going to get everybody on board? It's the same thing, trauma, not my thing, like that's your job. We had a student suicide, we had a teacher suicide. Even after that, people were very high alert about things, but still not in the classroom kind of thing. So I changed my approach. I no longer talk trauma. I talk student relationships. People can get on board with building good relationships with their students, which we all know any student that has that connection with a teacher or a staff member, they're more willing to, one, talk to them about what's going on, or they'll perform for them. You know, they'll give you what you need if you build that relationship. We've done a lot of exercises, excluding the bus ride. We put our entire staff up on chart paper this year, brought our entire student body through offices unannounced, nobody knew, so there was no campaigning going on out there. And we gave them dots, and I said, you can put as many dots on this board that you want to put on there. But you dot any staff person that you feel like you could go to, that, you know, if you had a problem, that you could talk to, caring adults, all of that stuff. We gave our staff the feedback on that. We had teachers that had 200 and 300 dots. We had teachers that had 4. Do I think that they intentionally wanted to have 4? No, but was it kind of a wake-up call for them of maybe what I'm doing is not working? The staff bought into that. Something that I visibly see that happens more and more because of those dots is that teachers are out in the hall saying, good morning. You know, how's it going? Did you have a good weekend? Be careful this weekend. Those types of things. That's still part of that relationship. So a couple months later, I flip-flopped it. We listed the entire student body on Post-it notes on our windows in the media center. And I told the teachers, any student that you can tell me 5 personal things about, not that they're failing your class or any of this, 5 personal things, rip their name off the wall. That was a very visual learning experience and eye-opening because you're sitting back there kind of sick to your stomach like, pull more names, please pull more names. And they were watching too, and of course you have those students that everybody in the world knows, you know, anybody could pull their name off. But when it was all said and done, here's what we're left with, guys. These are our students. And you imagine being the kid that walks into school every single day and being invisible. Like, these are the ones that we have to try to connect with. And that's okay if they're a shy person and maybe they don't want to, you know, be the one that's outgoing and talk. That's okay, but we need to know that about them. And we need to know that there's not other issues that are going on. And our teachers have really bought into the relationship piece. But I don't use the word trauma, and I don't use anxiety and depression. I don't throw out those buzzwords. High school kids will tell you. They have no problem filtering any of that. If you want to know it, they'll absolutely tell you. But it doesn't change the way that they cope with it. Because our high schoolers like to have a job just as much as that first grader likes to be the line leader. They like to have a purpose. We've used that with some of our simulated workplace, with our CTE. We've fed off some of those things in our regular classes as far as, hey, if it's just something, let them take the attendance when class starts. You know, let them go down and say, hey guys, go over on the board, you know, I'm going to shut the door. Give them a role. Give them something. Because they love it. They love it as much as, you know, anything. So we have used a lot of that with our kids, and the teachers are starting to see some of the changes. We are definitely starting to see some of the changes. And with that, you know, we can throw a little more in and a little more in, but they are definitely becoming more open-minded about the whole process. So.
I did want them each to kind of talk a little bit about the roles and their initiative. Some roles have changed over the course of a couple years, but some things that they do within our trauma initiative just because of the different roles that they play.
That's me. I'm the occupational therapist in our county, so I work a lot with our teachers, trying to make them a lot more aware of sensory needs, how to look for those things, and how to utilize our calming spaces more appropriately, how to do some things within the classroom so they may not have to go to those calming spaces, how to do whole classroom things so that they can kind of target all the children in the classroom even when they're not aware that there are some issues with their students. So that's kind of where I am leading with a lot of this, is just helping to educate our teachers, make them more understanding of sensory needs, because for me it's very obvious because I'm used to those words. I used to be in a clinical setting, so I was used to being around people who knew what sensory stuff was. Then I came into a school setting, and teachers are just like, I don't know what sensory means. And so I've had to be teaching our teachers, letting them know, like, we have different sensory systems, what they all mean and how they correlate to these kids' lives. And how that, I like to tell my teachers, even your smell can trigger a kid. If you have a perfume on or you have something on that reminds them of their mother that beat them last night, you may get behaviors that day. If they go into the cafeteria and there's a food smell that triggers them to something back at home that's a bad memory for them, then you may get behaviors. So sometimes even seeing that something that little can trigger our kids makes you open your eyes in a different way and to kind of look back at the whole situation. Sometimes we can't figure those out. But if you notice every day at a certain time something's happening, let's stop and let's look at what's happening at that time. Is it right before lunch and maybe they're just really, really hungry? Or is there a change in the environment or change in the smell, a change in the lighting, a change in anything? So just kind of help our teachers to see that and how to work that into a classroom. That's kind of where I'm going countywide right now.
When I started this job, I was just your average F-centered preschool teacher who had to do some evaluations, and I think I came into a caseload of about 12 kids who had a variety of developmental delays, some minor, some from a diagnosis or something. Now we don't have those kids anymore. And it's awful to say, but sometimes I just wish that we could go back to those days where we just had a few minor problems, because the kids we have now, and we have these conversations every day, every kid we have is a big mess. It's a big puzzle. It's a big, I've got a medical history a mile long that I've got to chase through 3 hospitals, and I've got custody papers, and I've got, DHHR forms, and who do we invite, and what do we got to do? And it's huge. It's huge. Our babies deserve it, though. And so since a diagnostician retired, and I kind of absorbed first the 3 role because I was familiar with the program. And so now I spend a lot of time with families selling them on the school system. Selling them that, all these terrible things that you hear about and think about and from the news or whatever, that's not going to happen. That's not what we do. It's not what we're about. But I also have to kind of balance that with, we can't give you the world. We have to be realistic. So it's really more of a parent relationship, but also a lot with teachers, with preschool teachers, selling them on the idea of Legia coming into their classroom and doing whole class interventions, or that it's okay if we teach sign language to everybody because we have 1 or 2 kids who really could benefit from that. So just having to kind of increase the vocabulary, just change the minds and help with some behavior stuff, that's really been the biggest change for me.
Well, I don't know that my role as a school counselor has changed tremendously. I am pulled a little more, I guess, for advice or that type of stuff. But what I will tell you that none of these fine folks will is I am that parent.
I'll tell you that.
I am that parent. And I have adopted 2 children, and I have one of my own. All are very different and unique in their own way, but I have worked with all of these people for different children in different ways, so I can say I am that parent. They would not say that about me, but they've been coworkers, but probably my biggest support system also. So my perspective has changed a lot just from the parents' point of view. So when I'm talking to other parents, whether it be with my 1st grade kid or my 5th grade kid or my 10th grade kid, I can say like, well, have you thought about this, or have you asked for an evaluation, or maybe just this screening, because I've kind of been through it myself as a parent. So my role has changed as a community member, as a parent, and then that therefore has kind of transformed me as a school counselor. So
I was probably in that 10%, she said, or more. Because I didn't want to buy into it. But, you know, I gave me the baby dolls. I said, oh, I'll just do it, whatever. If I get a baby, we'll rock them. Let's just play the part. Very happy. But then I started noticing the kids, started getting an attachment to them, getting closer to me. I was more treating the kid and not the disability. I saw more happiness. They were trusting more of me. They were more willing to, I wanted to take them to the comic space. It's like, okay, we'll go. It's like, because usually when they see me do something, they say, oh, you want punishment for something. I was that teacher, so now they're, I'm actually a warm person inside, not a, I'm not really all hateful.
I do, and some of you might have one or not, but is there a specific success story, you know, in the past 3 years that stands out to you?
Success story or just influence?
Either.
Well, I don't know if this is the same group of people, but I think you've showed this video once before.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody that knows me that has watched this video always stops and asks me about the young lady that I was talking about on the video, and that actually happened this year. What I always say as a school system, we're crunching numbers, we're looking at data, we're trying to identify high risk, we're looking at dropouts and graduation rates and course failures and attendance and all of that stuff. And I think the important thing to say about that kid is she didn't hit any of those indicators. None whatsoever. No system, no piece of data would have ever red flagged that kid for me. Even after what she went through, and the follow-up to that was when DHHR told mom, you can't abandon your children, that's illegal, then mom decided that the child was suicidal and needed to go to River Park Hospital for a while. So we went through that type of stuff. But never would she have shown up on any system that we have within the school system until about 2.5 months down the road, when she had probably reached her limit and came to school after drinking alcohol. And I say the highlight to that is, that's the one thing that's going to get her into a system that we can actually work with and advocate to help this kid. Because it's not a kid problem, it's a parent problem, and we know that. But in the grand scheme of things, she's a 14-year-old that's made it this far. And when you're looking at a 14-year-old compared to a 4-year-old, I understand why DHHR has the priorities that they have. But because she came to school after drinking alcohol, you know, we were able to at least file a petition which will get her with some support. Because we have, you know, talked to every agency and everything, and it didn't have a whole lot of luck. So that was kind of, I don't want to say that's a happy ending, but for this kid, she's going to go places. She's a bright girl. I have no doubt with the right interventions, she's going to go out there and be a great contributing member to society. But unfortunately, it took us to this point to get her there. So sometimes you have to take the bad with the good. And in this case, it's going to hopefully work out for her. So.
Do you have one?
I think I've got one. Not so much a story for this, but I'm going to go back to this section. Because technically, I was going to be over there at the table, and at the last minute, they said, hey, Mike, can you film this? And then I'm over here, and she forgets about me, and that's okay. I just want to say, when it comes to like roles, know your role. I know that sounds really bad, know your role. But like, when I say that, think about like what you know you can do and what your limitations are, and go outside of your normal circles. I know people tend to be very, I think the word is cliquish in some cases, and I've heard that a few times this weekend. But like, step outside your role, because, you know, especially they're all in the special ed office, we got a counselor. I'm the TIS, okay? I'm the technology guy. And several times over the last few days, I've heard, why are you doing this thing again? And it's not because I'm the guy running the video camera, but Rikki reaches out to different people. So there are different people with different skill sets and different things that can meet the needs of these kids, you know. So reach out to different people outside of your circles to find new resources, you know, because Rikki came to me about making a video, or fixing a PowerPoint, or doing all kinds of little things to help kind of get the word out, you know. We run, I also run a lot of social media. I know social media is like a very negative word. Like, there's probably some schools in here it's like, oh, you can't be friends with students online, it's against them, you get fired for that, blah, blah, no. You know, I'm that guy who's like, yeah, okay, I'll be a friend, because somebody's got to show that responsible way of doing it, you know. My Snapchat has baby and food on it all the time, you know. Same for my Twitter and Instagram and Facebook feed. You know this, am I right? So those are the kinds of things. So even like while we're here, you know, you build these relationships with other people. I've got a really good relationship with Sean O'Donoghue, who runs the local newspaper. So while we're sitting here and I listen to Rikki saying, I'm getting notifications in my pocket where they're at the school and he's posting clips of them doing a balloon release for, is it National Autism Day today?
Down Syndrome Day.
They're posting clips and I get to share that stuff online and see all the wonderful reactions and comments that people in our community make. And so I get the added benefit of, I'm the guy who gets to share all this wonderful news. So again, know your role, know your limitations, and reach out outside of your circles and pull people in.
The last question I had for your all's perspective is, where do you see Lincoln County going next, or what do you wish that West Virginia as a whole would do to address this issue that we know we're facing, but more than saying, okay, we know this is here, what do you want them to do?
More mental health resources. Mental health is a big one. We need more mental health resources. It's huge that we just got social workers in all of our schools, like that's going to help us with so many things, but we need so much more. I mean, we need, you know, our kids need counseling, they need professional mental health resources available to them. And we're in an area where we have one option, and that option is very, very limited. They do come into our schools when they can, but they have a super high staff turnover, so it's not any consistency for our kids. Some schools get them more often than others, but that's because they have a grant to do that. So, you know, we're really we're rural. Our schools are all spread apart. You know, our poverty numbers are high. We hold the highest number of babies born drug addicted in the state of West Virginia. It's a wonderful statistic to be at the top on, I'm sure. But we really need mental health resources for our kids and for our families. Our families need social support, and they need mental health support.
I think from my perspective, as I mentioned, I was not in the school system until 3 years ago. This is my third school year. And so I think for me, I saw things much differently because I haven't been in education my whole career. And so I think for me, just realizing what our students go through and being able to get other people to understand that. Because I know I talk to my husband and friends and stuff a lot, and I say, you just don't get it. You don't know what our kids go through. And I really think getting people to understand what our kids go through. And I actually was at a school recently, and a principal and I were talking, and he said something that really hit me so hard. We were talking about a different school in a different county, how that we had one of our staff members who had transferred to a different county. They were talking about how different things were there as far as behaviors and things like that, because those kids want to come to school to learn. That's what the school was kind of in a little higher class area. So those kids were raised by parents who say education's a great thing. You need to have an education. That's what you go to school for. So those kids want to go to school. So they don't want to go to school to act out or to do things like that. They want to go there to learn. But he said, but the thing is, in our county, our kids want to come to school to be fed and have somebody to love them. And that hit me so hard because I thought, that is so true. And that's what I see, is getting people to understand that our kids, they can't come to school just to learn anymore. They have to come to school to be fed, to find somebody who cares about them. And then just getting our staff to understand that, to where they can be that person to love them and to show them love. And I think that goes back to why we're doing what we're doing, is so we can catch these kids and make them know they are loved, they are cared about, and they need an education, but that we have to supply those other needs first to allow them to see the importance of their education. So I think even kind of spreading it out into the community, as somebody who didn't understand it for many years, and now that I'm in the schools and it slaps me in the face and I say, wow, that's, it's profound. Yeah, when you see how many of our kids just don't have the needs that they need at home.
So what questions do you all have? We have about 10 minutes, if that, and so what questions do you all have?
First of all, thank you. I think you're doing an excellent job, and thank you for sharing it with us. I think that's a great idea. The second thing, I love the visual of your jar. Could you explain that one more time, what color each thing represents?
Yes. So there are 7 different colors in the jar to have 7 different days of the week, and there are 24 of each color. So then when we pull the balls out, we will pull out the number of hours in that week that they are maybe in with their special education teacher or their therapist to have that visual between, 5 to the rest. I didn't even have the chance to do that. Now it's just. Yeah, well, I do. Pass that back to her. Okay, to define that, there's a joke between Meredith and myself that we have kindred neurons, because I will think of something and she'll come in my office and go, hey, let's do this next. And I went, were you in my head? So when she did that, I was like, you were in my head. Y'all have any questions?
How do your schools manage the adult supervision of the calming spaces?
What we tell them is first it has to come from a culture shift. If our school still is like, these are your kids, and these are your responsibility, and this is not mine, it doesn't work. Our schools that utilize the calming spaces the most and are most efficient in anybody can use them, they all completely take ownership, and they aren't quote unquote stingy with their time. We have principals that will go in and sit with kids, administrators, counselors, speech therapists, aides, teachers on planning, co-teachers, if kind of what's going on they can, not like co-teachers like this person is now assigned to that. Say they were all kind of individually working and they need to step out for 5 minutes. What they do is that they all pitch in and they make it work. Because their goal is to make it work, it works. My schools that say, okay, we have to be able to have a communication system so that this can get covered, it gets done. You go to the schools that they kind of butt heads on that, it's not utilized in the same way because they are their own barrier. But the ones that say that they can, they're all flexible with their time, they take ownership of all the kids, and that then they maneuver, because there is always some adult that has that time. Always. Whether the kid is on planning, or like what teacher's on planning, or there is an open space like duty time.
So you just use like a walkie-talkie system to say, got a kid who needs to go, who's available?
Rikki,
Yeah.
what about it being in the crisis plan?
Oh, with kids that the calming space is part of their crisis plan, there are designated people at designated times. Those are kind of set up for kids that are utilizing it within SAT, and we know what's kind of going on. There are specific people that they call on for that. When it's a kind of what Jessica was saying, this kid never would have popped up on any of our indicators, but this happened right now and they need that space. That's where anybody pitches in about who has time that's open.
And I'm a behavior analyst, so I deal in functions of behavior, and I buy into the rooms, the sensory rooms. I think that's very important. But there are people with the same. There are other behavior analysts who would say that's an escape. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, I know that it can be, but how are you managing that? Like, do you have kids that just use it as an escape, and then do they have to have some kind of compliance to get back?
Well, some of the things that we do is that we try to introduce it before anybody has a reason to go there anyway. But we also, when we take that data, the kids that are going to use it, that's going to come out in the data. One of the things that I try very much to kind of impart, and Troy touched on it this morning, was they aren't making the choice to have the maladaptive behaviors based on what has occurred to them. It's just what's happening because of the change of their brain. That is very different than kids that methodically make a choice to escape. And so, and where I said that every room has a data log,
Yes, and I did like the data.
the data comes out. And so if it's coming to use of escape, we have taken that kind of away. Okay, they're going to have to do this instead. But we let the data say that instead of assuming that up front, because we don't know their function of behavior at that moment, as in kind of the why in their head. So we want the data to show us, and then we have taken the use of that space away from certain kids that wanted to use it solely as an escape to replace with something else.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What if you've got multiple kids that need it at the same time?
Okay, so I'm first going to say that doesn't happen very often, and I'm really not sure why yet, but it hasn't. We also incorporate where I talked about that we really work hard within our classrooms to have fidgets, flexible seating, low lighting in all of our classes. A lot of our classrooms also have like cozy corners. So if it's something that can be managed in the classroom, we want it to be managed in the classroom. If it can't be, then they can go out to their calming space, which is probably why we haven't really faced that a whole lot. Because with our culture shift, our teachers are taking care of so much more in the classroom than they were able to do before. What we've looked at, some of our calming spaces, is that if somebody's kind of at the end of their space and someone needs to come in, just transitioning out, as in just kind of moving out. I honestly have never had two severe behavioral issues at one time that both needed it, so I don't have a good answer of what would we do with that, because we've been able to be proactive and not have that situation yet.
If there's a severe behavioral issue and a student does not want to go to that common space, are they escorted using the CGI escort?
No.
So they don't go there?
No, because it's not served as a punishment or anything negative. That is simply there to help them choose to self-regulate. If they do not want to go, it's an option to them. They don't want to go, they are not forced to go. Yeah. You guys have any other questions? I am very thankful to CASE and the Department of Ed for inviting myself and my staff to speak to you all this afternoon. This is something that's really important to us. I hope you have something that you can take back, and I hope you have a great rest of the time at the CASE conference.